To recognize the honourable member for Fox Hill.
Mr. Speaker, in the years between 2002 and 2007, I happened to serve as the Public Service Minister and got an opportunity during that time to witness firsthand the special nature of the way the public service works, the fact that it is a highly regulated environment and is a different kind of employer than the general public sector. In fact, contrary to the normal employment law, the laws relating to and the regulations relating to the public service are subject to judicial review and are subject to the rules of natural justice, which do not normally apply to employment law. And I start out there by saying part of the bargain which someone is hired into the public service strikes with his or her employer is that in exchange for this highly regulated and protected environment, the salaries and emoluments are generally considered to be lower than what you would get in the private sector. But the benefit you get is that once you are employed in the public service, you are in a highly protected environment. Translation, very difficult to get fired. And so, as representatives, you will know and have the experience of all of us that one of the most popular entry-level jobs in the Bahamas is, I would like a government job. Clerks, entry-level jobs. And, Mr. Speaker, once you get, and this is often the argument, once you get into the public service and you start at the bottom, you can work your way right up to the top. So it is possible, for example, like someone like the late Cleve Joaquin, who was a distinguished cabinet secretary to the cabinet, started off when he was 14 years old as a monitor in the school system and ended up, by progressions, becoming secretary to the cabinet. So it is that kind of institution. One of the great benefits also of being a public servant is that there is an unfunded pension entitlement which you get. And by unfunded, it means that you make no contribution out of your own salary to the benefit of a pension which you receive at the end of your employment. So that is a great benefit. And of course, the Social Services Commission, which was headed by the Reverend Alfred Stewart, I believe, in our first term, did a very comprehensive report on all of this. And one of the recommendations that people have been thinking about for a while is that the unfunded pension entitlements is becoming a huge expense for the central government. And the question is, how are we going to sustain this expense going forward? In fact, many have argued, as the member behind me has said, that this is unsustainable in the long term. And one of the recommendations of that commission was that in dealing with new hires, that perhaps a new term of the contract should be included in those terms, which indicates that going forward, not existing employees, but going forward, new employees should ask to be part of a contributory pension scheme. And over time, as years go by, the unfunded portion would then begin to decline down to zero. It will take a long time, but you have to start at some point. But these are amongst the reform measures which governments have to face. And what we see here now is just a small example of a number of comprehensive recommendations that have been made to the Public Service Minister to reform the terms and conditions and practices of the public service. This is but a small one. The Minister pointed out where this most occurs. What happens generally is that someone dies suddenly and has not taken into account that they don't have private insurance, they have not, or they have written a will, they don't have tremendous resources. And the only way they can access what is, I believe, a year's salary, which everyone who is on the permanent and pensionable establishment gets upon their death as a death benefit, is by going through the probate courts. And if you're talking an annual salary of $15,000 a year, it is easy for 20% of that to go straight away in court costs. And then, of course, there's the question of how long it's going to take. Very often it's difficult to determine who is the heir at law. You know, under the present law, if you die without a will, and this includes children who are born outside of a marriage, it's to all the children in equal shares. And this is where the fighting begins. Because as soon as mother or dad is gone, the 5 children who professed great love for one another while mom and dad were alive, as soon as mom and dad are dead, suddenly money becomes an issue and they start fighting with one another. And it is not unusual for members of Parliament to be confronted time and time again with the question of helping to pay for funerals. You may remember, Mr. Speaker, that one time we attempted, when we were in opposition, to amend the vote with regard to what social services provides for as a payment or a death benefit for those people who are indigent and unable to pay for their loved ones to be buried. I think at the time it was $500. It has now been up to $650. And in special circumstances, you may appeal for a larger benefit. But even $650, or even if you get $1,300, the best that can do is a cremation. And most people in this country want to be buried, fully laid out properly. So this becomes a practical problem. I'm happy, therefore, to be able to rise and second this modest effort to be able to make it easier for people to plan their futures, so to speak. And it is also an occasion to make the point that it is important for people to plan their future, including your death, and what happens to your estate afterwards. Because very often you can leave your affairs in quite a messy state. I was smiling to myself that this is a macabre kind of humor, but about people who can, the minister said that the bill allows you to be able to change at will whether you have, if you want to substitute a new beneficiary. And I recall when I was an attorney in practice, I had a client who had 5 children. And every time he got into a row with them, he says, I'm going to see my lawyer, and I'm going to write you out of the will. So I counseled him. I said, that's a very dangerous thing to be telling your children, because many a man has found himself dead by threatening his children with that. So if you're going to change your will, just come into the lawyer and change the will. Don't threaten the children with it. But the serious point is that you should plan your estate. And one of the factors which I have, when I was public service minister, I couldn't understand is that at the 30th year, you were able to collect your pension and gratuity from the public service. You can get, I think it's, at that point, it's 2/3 of your pension entitlement. If you stay for 40 years, you get the maximum pension, but not significantly more than what you would have gotten at 30 years. And so it really is in your interest, if you are relatively young and have worked 30 years, to collect your pension and gratuity at the 30-year point, and to seek work either by return to the service or in some other endeavor, because you really maximally benefit from taking advantage of the 30 years. Few people do that. And so what I've often said again is we're not in a situation in our country where we do estate planning because, of course, income tax doesn't operate that way. We have no death taxes which operate on our estates. But at the same time, it's a good idea to try and plan your future and see what most benefits you in the course of your employment, and when it is beneficial to you to get liquid, and when it is beneficial to you to invest in solid investments, and, of course, to start a new phase of your life. I'd like to say, Mr. Speaker, and to join with the Public Service Minister in thanking all those who work in the public service, because they keep the system going. In speaking at a funeral in Grand Bahama last week, I made this observation that I was a witness, or have been the witness, to two transitions in power. The first transition in 1992, that is close up. I was a boy in 1967, but in 1992, when the government switched from PLP to FNM. And what you saw happening there is that as Hurricane Andrew bore down on the country, the political directorate actually almost had to do nothing, because the public service had done all the planning and put in place all the steps to make sure that the country was protected, almost on automatic. And similarly, I saw the transition in 2002. And we came to office in 2002 shortly before independence. And the public service had already done all of the planning. Everything was in place so that the ceremonies and practices that we expected for independence would all be done. It was all done, all laid out. And that's what the central bureaucracy is supposed to do. In fact, in the classic training that I received, while you're in government, the public service is supposed to be looking at what the practices and policies are of the opposition party, so that when the opposition party, and it'll be a long time for that side, but I just want to tell them, that the public service is to know what the policies are, so when the new government comes, they can seamlessly step into government and serve the new prime minister in the same seamless fashion that they served the last prime minister. That's what a good public service does. And I think we have a service that is well trained and an excellent service. And I read somewhere, you may correct me, Public Service Minister, if I'm not correct, that the public service, the Bahamas is like number 3 or number 2 in the world for leadership of women in management. And so I want to put in a plug for the women managers in the public service. They have excelled. There's certainly no lack of equality. You know, this complaint that women, well, I hope not. Let me not speak too authoritatively. the female members of Parliament may correct me here. But I think there is equal pay for equal work in the public service. Women get paid more, so men get paid less. But there's equal pay for equal work in the public service. So this is what I'm saying, going back again to this highly regulated environment which we find. And so, Mr. Speaker, I commend the bill to the House. I support it. I think it's a good first effort at making it easier for people to get their funds. And it's important now for us to promote this in the public service, to let people know that when this bill comes into force, now you have to swear, it has to be done before a notary. Okay, so remember, it has to be done before a notary or a justice of the peace. It's not simply writing a letter. If you want to access this provision, please note that it must be done before a notary or a justice of the peace. So you can write and say, I designate my sister, a named individual, or my brother, or my aunt, or my friend, to be the person who collects this money upon my passing. But it must be notarized before a justice of the peace or a notary public. So with those few words, I commend the bill to the House.